Black CEO, removed from first class for white passenger minutes later. He freezes the airline's $120M budget. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's video, I need your help. We've noticed that the channel is losing traction, and subscribing is one of the best ways you can help us. It's quick, free, and allows us to continue bringing you great content. Your support means everything. Let's keep this channel growing collectively. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's get back to the story. Sir, you need to vacate this seat. Immediately. The sentence cracked through the first-class cabin like a slap made of glass, sharp, clean, impossible to ignore. Heads turned. Screens paused, mid-movie. Champagne flutes trembled in manicured fingers. No turbulence, no emergency, just a single command, projected with the kind of confidence only someone accustomed to unquestioned authority could muster. Flight attendant Naomi stood over seat 2A, chin lifted, posture rigid. She wasn't whispering. She wasn't discreet. She wanted the whole cabin to hear. And they did. In the leather seat she hovered over, Marcus looked up slowly, his jaw still, his expression unreadable beneath the soft glow of the overhead lamp. He had boarded quietly, with no entourage, no fanfare. Black tailored suit, simple watch, a calm so steady it almost unsettled the nervous energy of the cabin. But Naomi didn't see composure. She saw something else, something she thought didn't belong here. This seat, she repeated, enunciating each word as if speaking to someone who needed instructions spelled out, is reserved for a priority passenger. A ripple of curiosity ran down the aisle. Someone muttered, "He must have snuck in from business class." Another whispered, "First class is ruined these days." A woman in pearls didn't even bother whispering. She simply rolled her eyes and said, "There's always one." Marcus didn't move. "Not yet. Before we continue, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. And if you believe in dignity and justice, hit like and subscribe." These stories spark change, and we're glad you're here. Now, back to Marcus. At the front of the cabin, a white man in a navy blazer strutted in, his wife trailing behind with a smug smile fixed on her lips. They walked like royalty arriving late to their own coronation. The man's gaze landed instantly on Marcus and lingered a beat too long. "That's my seat," he said with a smirk. His tone didn't ask. It declared. Naomi nodded eagerly. "Yes, Mr. Whitmore. Well, have you seated in just a moment?" Just like that, as if the verdict had already been delivered, she gestured again for Marcus to rise. "I need you to move. Now!" The cabin held its breath. Even the soft hum of the engines seemed to retreat, as if aware something was wrong with the air. Marcus lifted his eyes toward her, slow, deliberate. The kind of slow that makes a room shift without a sound. He didn't look angry. He didn't look surprised, but there was a weight in his gaze, something deep, restrained, like steel wrapped in velvet. "I have a boarding pass for this seat," he said evenly. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. Naomi scoffed. "And am sure it was a mistake in the system. These things happen. But Mr. Whitmore is a Platinum Legacy client." Her voice warmed instantly when she said Whitmore's name, coated with the sugary professionalism reserved for those whose wallets she assumed carried gravity. Whitmore let out a chuckle that carried the sting of amusement at someone else's expense. "It's fine," he said loudly. "I don't mind waiting while he finds where he's actually supposed to be." The word actually landed like a blade. A woman across the aisle lifted her phone, recording subtly behind the veil of a cashmere sleeve. Another passenger whispered, "Does he even look like someone who can afford first class?" Marcus heard it. He always did. Naomi leaned closer, lowering her tone but not her disdain. "Sir, please don't make this uncomfortable. Just grab your things." Before he could respond, Whitmore's wife chimed in. "Honestly, this is why they need stricter boarding checks. We paid for an experience, not confusion." Someone chuckled. Someone else murmured, "Agreement." Phones tilted. The stage lights of humiliation clicked on, one by one. Marcus finally set down the leather-bound notebook in his hand. The gold-edged corner caught the cabin light for half a second, just long enough to suggest that perhaps the biggest mistake in the room wasn't the seat assignment, but the assumptions being built atop it. He rose slowly, not conceding, but observing, measuring the room, measuring them. Naomi exhaled in triumph, already motioning Whitmore forward, but as Marcus stepped into the aisle, something shifted. It wasn't loud, it wasn't dramatic. It was a breath in the cabin's lungs, a faint, nearly imperceptible tension that promised this moment wasn't the humiliation they thought it was. It was the beginning of something else, something the cabin would remember long after landing. And Marcus, as he slid one hand into his pocket, was far from finished. The aisle lights glowed a soft amber as Marcus stepped aside, the narrow corridor suddenly feeling too small for the tension it held. He didn't argue. He didn't demand. He simply moved with the kind of measured calm that unsettles people who expect chaos. Whitmore brushed past him with an exaggerated grin, tossing a smug, "Thanks, buddy," over his shoulder, the kind of buddy used only to remind someone they are beneath you. His wife followed, smoothing her designer coat as if Marcus' existence had added dust to the air. Naomi beamed at them the way people beam at money. "Welcome to first class. Please make yourselves comfortable." The cabin murmured its approval. A few nods. A few quiet laughs. The unspoken consensus. Order had been restored. Marcus remained in the aisle, fingers resting lightly against the headrest of his original seat. He wasn't blocking anyone, but he wasn't hurrying either. His stillness radiated a different kind of pressure, silent, deliberate, coiled. A man in seat 1C leaned toward his wife. "Told you, he didn't look like he belonged." His wife whispered back, "Probably an upgrade mistake." The comments floated, shameless and unchecked, bouncing off cream leather and brushed metal. It was the kind of prejudice that didn't need volume, only confidence. A flight attendant from economy peeked through the curtain, eyes widening when she saw the scene. She recognized Marcus. She opened her mouth, ready to say something, but Naomi caught her gaze and shook her head sharply. The younger attendant swallowed her words and disappeared behind the drape. Marcus noticed. He noticed everything. He turned slowly, taking in each face. Curious, entertained, dismissive. Phones angled toward him under the guise of adjusting brightness. A businessman in 3A typed rapidly on his tablet, likely tweeting about the commotion. A teenager smirked into his camera, whispering to his followers, "Dude's getting kicked out of first class." The cabin wasn't just watching. It was consuming. A soft chime echoed from the galley pre-boarding announcements. The pilot's voice followed, warm and rehearsed. "Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be departing shortly. Cabin crew, please prepare for takeoff." But the cabin wasn't preparing. It was bracing. Naomi gestured toward an empty seat in row 4. "Sir, this is available until we verify your boarding class." Her voice carried the sickly sweetness of someone offering help while twisting the knife. Marcus' eyes drifted to the seat, a downgrade dressed as a compromise. Before he could reply, a voice broke the tension. "Excuse me," someone said softly. A black woman in 3F, quiet, elegant, mid-50 leaned forward, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Her voice trembled, not with fear but with recognition. "Are you Marcus Ellington?" The name rippled through the cabin like a stone hurled into still water. Naomi froze. Whitmore stiffened in his newly stolen seat. A few passengers frowned, trying to place the name. One man whispered, "Ellington? Ellington?" Like the aviation group? Marcus didn't answer immediately. He simply looked at the woman, really looked, and offered the faintest nod. The woman covered her mouth. "My son works for your company. He always says the leadership there changed his life." A sharp inhale cut through the cabin. Someone muttered, "Wait, leadership?" Another, "Aviation group?" As in, this airline's board? A pulse of confusion spread, a buckle in certainty, a fracture in arrogance. Naomi swallowed hard. "Sir, if you'll just take the temporary seat, we can." Marcus finally spoke. "Am fine standing," he said softly, but the softness carried weight. Enough to shift the air. At the far end of the cabin curtain, the junior flight attendant reappeared, breathless, as if she'd run a mile in 20 feet. She leaned close to Naomi, whispering urgently, too urgently. Naomi's expression drained. Her eyes flicked toward Marcus. Then toward Whitmore. Then back to Marcus. The cabin didn't know what was said. Not yet. but it could feel the shift, the tilt, the unraveling thread pulling tighter and tighter. Marcus lifted his phone not in anger, not in retaliation, but in decision. One thumb movement, one quiet breath. One moment the cabin would replay for years. Because the humiliation wasn't ending. It was about to reverse. And it wouldn't be subtle. The curtain at the front of the cabin slid open with a hushed urgency, the kind that draws every pair of eyes without a single voice calling for attention. The junior attendant, her badge red Lena, stepped forward, cheeks flushed, breath uneven. She glanced at Marcus, then at Naomi, then at Whitmore lounging in two. A-like head conquered a small nation. "Naomi," Lena whispered, but in the strained silence of first class, it felt amplified. "You need to check your system." "Now." Naomi forced a dismissive smile. "Lena, please, I'm handling it." "No," Lena said, firmer than anyone expected. "You're not." A ripple passed through the cabin. Even Whitmore's smirk faltered. Naomi pressed her lips into a thin line and pulled out her tablet, tapping with brisk irritation. The device chimed, loading passenger credentials. Her eyes skimmed, bored, confident Shed find exactly what Shed assumed all along. Then she stopped. Her eyes widened, and she read the line again. Seat 2A Ellington, Marcus J. Status: Executive Board Access Tier. Owner Allocation: Priority Alpha Owner. Not Platinum, not VIP. The system reserved this tier for only two categories: founding members and equity partners with controlling power. Naomi's face blanched as if the cabin lights had drained her blood. A man across the aisle whispered, "Owner? Of what?" Another murmured, "Wait, Ellington as in the Ellington Group?" Someone finished, voice cracking like porcelain. Whitmore's laugh died in his throat. He shifted uncomfortably, clearing his voice. "This obviously is a glitch." Marcus didn't look at him. He didn't look at Naomi. He simply stood there, breathing in the sterile air recycled through a system he partially controlled. For a moment, the cabin felt suspended, like time hadn't stopped, but was waiting for permission to move. Naomi tried again, scrolling, hands shaking. "There must be—" "This can't be right," Lena swallowed. "It is right. I checked with ground staff, and—" She hesitated, then continued. "Hes here for an inspection flight." A collective gasp rose like a wave. Inspection. The word detonated across the cabin's hierarchy. The businessman in 1C sat up straighter. The woman in pearls covered her mouth. Even the teenager filming lowered his phone a fraction. An inspection flight meant evaluation. Evaluation meant funding. Funding meant the airline's financial artery. Whitmore leaned forward in two, a voice trembling. "Inspection for what?" Lena exhaled. "The board's review of the renewal budget. The 120 million. Silence. Thicker than the cabin walls. Deeper than the judgment that had filled the air minutes earlier. Every passenger felt it at the same time. They hadn't witnessed a simple seat dispute. They'd witnessed the single most self-destructive act a crew could commit. Marcus finally moved. He turned, calm as ever, and took one slow step back toward his stolen seat, toward the place he had been forced from. Naomi's breath caught. Whitmore tensed. The cabin leaned in. Marcus didn't sit. Not yet. He looked at Naomi, his voice steady, gentle even, but a gentleness that carried the weight of consequences. "Is there still a question about where I belong?" The question wasn't a question. It was a mirror held up to every face in the aisle. Naomi opened her mouth, but no sound came out. She looked at her shoes, her authority crumbling like sand. Whitmore tried to recover, laughing nervously. "Hey, sir, misunderstandings happen. Let's, laugh it off, have a drink." Marcus' eyes flicked to him, not sharp, not cold, simply precise. "You seemed very certain earlier," he said softly. "Don't lose your confidence now." Whitmore swallowed hard. I didn't mean I know exactly what you meant." The teenager, sensing history unfolding, whispered to his phone, "Bro, this is wild." Naomi stepped forward, her voice cracking. "Mr. Ellington, your seat is ready. Please, accept my apology." Marcus didn't take the seat. He didn't need to. He lifted his phone again, the screen reflecting in his eyes. A single notification pulsed at the top. Rachel, awaiting confirmation. Ready to proceed with freeze. The freeze. The $120 million freeze. The cabin didn't know the details, but it felt the gravity gathering around him like a storm tightening its grip. Then Marcus gave the smallest nod. Just one. Barely perceptible. But enough. He pressed send. And in that instant, every assumption in the cabin collapsed under the weight of a truth they had refused to see. They had not removed a man from first class. They had pushed the board's equity partner out of his own seat and triggered the moment that would cost the airline more than any passenger on that flight could possibly imagine. The vibration was almost inaudible, a faint buzz against Marcus' palm, but its consequences would ring far louder than any engine in the sky. The message Head just sent left his phone with a soft chime, vanishing into encrypted channels that fed directly into the airline's financial arteries. Across the cabin, no one knew what that sound meant, but they felt it. Naomi stepped back, her eyes shimmering with a mix of fear and disbelief. Whitmore shifted in 2A, tugging at his blazer like fabric alone could restore dignity. A handful of passengers straightened their posture, pretending they hadn't just contributed to a public humiliation seconds before. But the junior attendant, Lena, kept her gaze steady on Marcus, recognition softening her features. She looked like the only person in the cabin who understood the magnitude of the shift happening in real time. Marcus slipped his phone into his pocket, then finally quietly took his seat. Not the temporary seat Naomi had suggested, not the downgraded compromise. He sat in 2A, his seat, the one he paid for, the one he owned in more ways than the cabin could comprehend. A few passengers exhaled, confused by their own relief. First class wasn't used to shame being redirected upward. Whitmore's wife leaned toward her husband, whispering harshly, "Do something." "Do what?" he hissed back, voice cracking. "He's the owner person thing." She blinked at him. "The owner person thing?" He didn't answer. He couldn't. Lena approached Marcus slowly, her steps controlled, respectful. "Sir, can I get you anything? Water? Tea?" Marcus looked up at her, the only flight attendant who had tried to intervene, and nodded once. "Water. Thank you." Her shoulders eased, as though the simple request granted her dignity she feared the uniform had stolen. The curtain behind them rustled. A senior crew member, an in-flight manager with silver stripes on his uniform, stepped inside, eyes scanning the tense tableau. His voice was low but urgent. "Mr. Ellington," he said, hands clasped in front of him. "We've been informed of the situation. I want to personally apologize." The captain is preparing to come out, and Marcus raised a hand. Not dismissive, just controlled. "That won't be necessary," he said. "For now." The manager swallowed. "Of course. Please let us know if there's anything we can do." And then, softly, he added, "We were unaware you were evaluating us today." Naomi's breath hitched. She looked like she might faint. Marcus didn't respond. He didn't need to. The intercom crackled overhead. A pause, a breath. Then the captain's voice, slightly shaky despite decades in the air. "Ladies and gentlemen, we've been informed of a delay before departure. Please remain seated as we finalize communication with ground headquarters." Ground headquarters. The words weren't random. They hinted at urgency at systems stirring where systems normally slept. Whitmore leaned forward, sweat forming at his hairline. "This can't be because of that seat thing, right?" he whispered to no one in particular. No one answered. At the far end of the cabin, a businessman typed furiously into his phone. "Rumor, CEO, board member on flight." Crew insulted him. "Major freeze incoming?" The teenager from earlier raised his camera again. "TikTok's gonna eat this up," he muttered, but with far less bravado than before. Marcus rested his hands on his lap, gaze fixed out the window. Below, the runway lights stretched like a path etched in gold. Above them, the cabin's shallow breaths merged into a single, nervous hum, and then another vibration. He lifted the phone. A new message from Rachel, his CFO. Freeze executed. All non-essential expenditures halted, awaiting next directive. His eyes flicked once to the aisle where Naomi stood frozen, her confidence gone, replaced by a dawning horror. At the front of first class, Lena returned with a glass of water. She handed it to him gently, whispering, "Thank you for staying calm. Most people would've. Anger wastes Altitude, Marcus said quietly. She nodded, understanding more than he expected. Beyond the curtain, hurried footsteps echoed. Decisions were being made, careers trembling, executives scrambling to understand how a single flight had become a financial fault line. The cabin didn't know the specifics, but the shift was unmistakable. Moments ago, they watched a man being ordered out of a seat. Now, they watched the airline itself brace for impact, because the man in seat 2A had just frozen $120 million without raising his voice, without standing up, without needing anything more than the truth of who he was. The runway lights flickered against the window as the aircraft idled, held in an unnatural pause. First class was silent, not peacefully silent, but the kind of silence that built itself out of fear and unfinished sentences. Everyone sat straighter, spoke softer, breathed shallower. Something enormous had shifted, and they all felt it, even if they didn't yet understand its size. A low hum vibrated through Marcus' phone, a secure call request, encrypted, priority level. He glanced at the screen. Ops HQ, immediate contact required. He rejected it. The message alone was enough. Panic did not need a voice. Across the aisle, Whitmore's leg bounced uncontrollably, his face chalk white. His wife dabbed at her forehead with a napkin, whispering, "Just apologize. Say something. Fix it." Whitmore swallowed. Fix what? He froze the company's money. He froze the money. 3 rows back, the businessman in 1C had given up pretending to read his magazine. His eyes kept drifting to Marcus like he was watching a lit fuse he couldn't look away from. Even the pearl necklace woman, who had rolled her eyes minutes earlier, now clasped her hands like she was in church. Naomi stood at the galley entrance, back pressed to the wall, her tablet clutched in both hands. She hadn't moved for several minutes. She stared ahead, stunned, as if re-watching her own actions on an invisible screen she could no longer turn off. The senior manager, Ramirez, returned, whispering urgently to her. "Corporate wants a statement immediately. They want a full report before we depart." I didn't know who he was," Naomi stammered. "That's the problem," Ramirez replied. "It shouldn't matter who he is." He glanced nervously toward Marcus, then back to Naomi. "This isn't about a seat anymore. You understand that, right?" Naomi nodded stiffly, shame carving lines into her posture. Lena lingered near the curtain, watching all of it, the panic, the unraveling, the corporate scramble behind the scenes. She took a slow breath, steadying herself, and approached Marcus again. "Sir," she said softly, "I just want you to know. I'm really sorry for what happened." Marcus lifted his gaze. "You weren't the problem." Her eyes glistened, but she managed a small smile. "Thank you." Behind her, the cabin's screen suddenly blinked, resetting. A system reboot. A universal sign that something major was happening in the airline's internal network. Passengers murmured, "What's going on? Why are we rebooting? Is the flight canceled? Is this because of him?" But the loudest question in their eyes, if not their voices, was simpler. "How much power does this man have?" A notification appeared on Marcus' screen. Rachel again. Board group chat exploding. COO requesting urgent clarification. "Shall we initiate audit hold?" Audit hold. That was not a freeze. That was a shutdown. Marcus exhaled slowly, the air cool against his throat. He didn't respond. Not yet. Timing mattered. Precision mattered. Consequences mattered. He looked out the window, watching a service vehicle crawl across the tarmac like a slow-moving thought. He heard his grandmother's voice, a memory, soft and worn. "Never let the world tell you where you belong. You tell it, quietly." He turned back to the cabin. The faces staring at him weren't the same faces that had judged him minutes ago. Their expressions had shifted from entitlement to confusion to alarm. Arrogance had evaporated, leaving only the brittle remains of self-awareness. Marcus' thumb hovered over the screen. Audit hold. One more step that would rattle the airline's bones. He didn't press it, yet. Instead, he slid the phone into his pocket and looked toward Ramirez, who hurried over as if summoned by telepathy. "Yes, sir," Ramirez blurted, standing straighter. "Sit down," Marcus said calmly. "I need a word." Ramirez obeyed instantly, folding into the seat opposite like a student awaiting judgment. Marcus leaned forward slightly, his voice low but unmistakably controlled. "What happened today," he said, "is not about embarrassment. It's about culture. And culture reflects leadership." Ramirez nodded vigorously. "Yes, sir, absolutely. We will review." "You will do more than review," Marcus said. "You will report honestly, you will implement changes, and you will ensure this never happens to anyone ever." Ramirez swallowed. "Yes, Mr. Ellington, I understand." But Marcus wasn't finished. "Because the next decision I make," he said quietly, "will determine the future of this airline." The words slid into the cabin like cold air. People shivered without knowing why. Ramirez nodded again, this time with genuine fear. "Well, fix it. I promise." Marcus held his gaze for a long, weighted second, measuring sincerity, measuring awareness, deciding what kind of man sat before him. Then he nodded once. Ramirez exhaled shakily, as if head been underwater. Behind them, a voice broke the silence. "Excuse me, sir." Everyone turned. It was Whitmore, standing, hands trembling, eyes pleading. The man who took his seat was finally stepping into the gravity of what Head done. And Marcus, calm, still unshaken, turned toward him, ready to hear the apology the entire cabin had been waiting for. Whitmore stood in the aisle like a man caught in a collapsing building, wavering, pale, swallowing words that weren't used to being humble. The cabin's lights washed over him, exposing every crack in the performance he was trying to hold together. His fingers gripped the headrest of 2B, knuckles white as bone. "Mr. Ellington," he said, voice thin, I wanted to apologize." The apology hovered, unfinished, trembling in the air between them. Marcus didn't lean back. He didn't fold his arms. He simply looked at Whitmore with the same quiet composure Head held since the beginning, an unwavering stillness that made excuses dissolve before they were spoken. Whitmore coughed, trying again. "I didn't realize who you were." A wave of discomfort rippled through the cabin. A woman in row 3 sucked in a sharp breath. Someone whispered, "Oh no," because that sentence, those 6 words, were a confession, not an apology. And Marcus heard it exactly for what it was. He tilted his head slightly, his expression unreadable. "What would you have done differently?" he asked softly. "If I were someone else?" The question slashed through Whitmore's rehearsed remorse like a blade. Passengers shifted in their seats, their shame reflected in his. Naomi stiffened. Her eyes began to glisten. Even Ramirez looked down. The weight of the culture head allowed echoing in the silence. Whitmore sputtered, I just meant that I didn't intend any offense. I was just trying to get to my seat." "There was a mistake," Marcus cut in gently. "And you assumed the mistake was me." Whitmore opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. No words came. His wife reached out, tugging at his sleeve, urging him to sit before he sank deeper. But Whitmore stayed frozen, trapped in the wreckage of his own prejudice. Finally, he whispered, "I'm sorry." Real remorse this time, or fear. Often, they sounded the same. Marcus nodded once acknowledgement, not forgiveness. Whitmore lingered, unsure whether the conversation was done, but Marcus had already shifted his attention. His gaze moved past the businessman, past the rows of silent passengers, settling instead on the tense stillness of the cabin itself. Everyone felt the moment pivot. Lena stepped forward timidly, as if asking permission to speak. "Mr. Ellington, corporate has requested we hold departure until they can brief you. They're sending a direct call to your device." Almost immediately, Marcus' phone vibrated a longer, heavier buzz than before. He glanced down. "Co-O requesting live line. Urgent." He didn't answer. He set the phone face down on his tray. A soft gasp passed through first class. Even the air felt thinner. Naomi finally broke. Tears welled at the corners of her eyes, spilling into her voice. "Sir, I am truly sorry. I shouldn't have spoken to you the way I did." Her words trembled, raw and unpolished. I thought I was doing my job." Marcus looked at her a long moment. "You were enforcing your assumptions," he said quietly. "Not your job." She folded inward, nodding, tears running freely now. Lena stepped beside her, placing a gentle hand on her arm, a silent reminder that apology didn't erase responsibility, but it was a start. The captain appeared at the curtain. hat in hand, shoulders tight with tension. When he saw Marcus, he nearly stood at attention. "Mr. Ellington," he said, voice controlled but strained, "we're ready to depart the moment you approve. But I understand corporate may have advised otherwise." Marcus studied him. The captain's eyes were steady, honest. This man had nothing to do with the humiliation. He was simply caught in the crossfire of bias he didn't commit. "Well, depart," Marcus said. The captain exhaled visibly, relief flooding through his shoulders. "Yes, sir." "Thank you, sir." He stepped back toward the cockpit, and the curtain fell closed with a soft whisper. Marcus picked up his glass of water, took a slow sip, then set it down with the lightest tap against the tray. A sound so small, yet the room reacted as if a gavel had struck marble. Then his phone buzzed again. Rachel. "Press has wind of the incident. Reporters requesting comment. Shall we release your statement?" He looked across the cabin. Whitmore sat rigid, staring at the floor. Naomi wiped her eyes quietly, shaken to her core. Ramirez clutched his tablet like a lifeline. Lena stood with her hands folded, her empathy steady and visible. The passengers, the same ones who had murmured judgments hours earlier, now watched with silent, humbling recognition. Marcus lifted his phone. One thumb movement would ignite headlines. One sentence could shatter careers. One press release could set the airline's fate in stone. But instead of responding to Rachel, he locked the screen. Not out of mercy, not out of fear, but because consequences were not delivered in haste, they were delivered with purpose. He leaned back in his seat, not victorious, not vindictive, just certain. The plane began to roll, engines rising, apologies lingering, power shifting, and somewhere deep within the airline's headquarters, alarms were still blinking. The story wasn't over. It was only beginning to reach altitude. The engines steadied into a low, powerful hum as the jet lifted off the runway, climbing through a sky that now felt heavier than the air itself. First class remained unnervingly still. No clinking glasses, no small talk, no forced laughter, just a suspended, collective awareness that something irreversible had begun. The seatbelt signs chimed softly overhead. A routine sound, but tonight it felt like punctuation. Marcus didn't look out the window as the city shrank beneath them. He looked forward, calm, unhurried, unmoved. Across from him, Ramirez sat stiff as stone, tapping nervous messages into his tablet. Naomi remained in the galley entrance, dabbing at her eyes, replaying every second of her mistake. Whitmore stared into nothing, his forehead pressed against his palm, drowning in a humiliation he never imagined could reach him. The plane reached cruising altitude. The cabin lights dimmed. A faint clatter echoed as the crew prepared beverage service, mechanical, shaky, rehearsed. Then Marcus' phone vibrated again. Not a buzz. A cascade. Notifications stacked rapidly across the screen. Internal pings, corporate alerts, financial triggers, media flags. Rachel's name appeared at the top. It's spreading. 3 board members already aware. Social team intercepted a passenger's post before it went viral, but others are surfacing. Recommend issuing a controlled narrative before the airline tries to bury it. Marcus didn't open the attachments, but the meaning was clear. The world outside that aircraft, the one of headlines, investors, algorithms, and power, was already circling the scent of a story. He placed the phone face down on the table again, the gesture almost meditative. Lena returned, placing a warm towel gently beside him. "If you need anything truly, just ask." "Thank you," Marcus said. A simple exchange. But in a cabin full of people terrified of what came next, her sincerity stood out like a lighthouse. Meanwhile, Ramirez cleared his throat. "Sir, with respect, corporate is asking if the freeze is permanent." A few passengers tensed, trying and failing to pretend they weren't listening. Marcus didn't answer immediately. He let the quiet stretch, let the weight settle over every seat between them. Finally, he replied, "That depends." Ramirez swallowed. "On what, sir?" "Whether the company learns from this," Marcus said, "or hides from it." Those words, soft and precise, landed like a verdict. Even the engines seemed to soften, as if listening. Ramirez nodded, trembling slightly, then rose with a bow of respect that didn't feel performative, it felt necessary. The moment he walked away, Whitmore approached again, slower this time, as if approaching a fragile truth instead of a man. He stopped 2 feet from Marcus. "I know an apology isn't enough," Whitmore whispered, voice cracked, "but my wife and I were ashamed. We acted like people we never wanted to become." Marcus looked at him for a long moment, no rage, no satisfaction, just a measured stillness. "You acted like people you already were," Marcus said, not unkindly, simply true. Whitmore winced. His wife covered her mouth. "But," Marcus continued, "you don't have to stay that way." Whitmore blinked rapidly, unsure whether he'd been condemned or offered a path out of the rubble. "Fix who you are," Marcus said. "Not because of who I am, but because of who you want to be when no one is watching." Those words hung in the air, vibrating across the rows, deeper than any reprimand. Whitmore nodded slowly, painfully, and retreated to his seat with the heavy walk of a man seeing himself clearly for the first time. The cabin exhaled, softly, unevenly. But the moment of reflection didn't last. Another alert flashed on Marcus' locked phone. A red banner, urgent. Lena noticed the light, hesitating. "Is everything all right, sir?" Marcus wiped condensation from the glass of water with his thumb, his voice calm. "Everything is exactly where it needs to be." But that wasn't the truth. Not entirely. Because at that very moment, halfway across the country, executives were scrambling in a conference room filled with blinking monitors. The freeze had halted aircraft maintenance orders, paused vendor payments, suspended fuel contracts. Systems were choking, budgets stalling, leadership panicking. And all of it traced back to one man sitting quietly in seat 2A. The incident wasn't viral yet, not fully, but it was building inside the airline, inside the cabin, inside the conscience of every passenger who had witnessed the moment bigotry tried to claim power it didn't own. The pressure was rising. The story was reaching altitude. And the next move Marcus made would determine whether this airline merely felt turbulence or crashed headfirst into accountability. The cabin lights brightened slightly as the crew prepared for meal service, but the atmosphere remained thick, like a storm cloud trapped inside a luxury shell of leather seats and polished chrome. First-class passengers were no longer lounging. They were listening, watching, recalibrating. Every small gesture Marcus made seemed to ripple outward. Somewhere mid-cabin, a phone vibrated loudly. A woman gasped. "Oh my God! My news app just pushed something. Something about this airline and an internal freeze." Her husband shushed her, but she wasn't the only one seeing it. Screens lit up like fireflies in the dimmed cabin. Row 3, row 1, row 5. The whispers built in layers. Is this real? Is he the reason? Can someone really freeze a company's money from a plane? Who is he? The teenager who'd filmed earlier stared at his phone in disbelief. His post had exploded. Comments ran down the screen at lightning speed. What did she say to him? Is he a CEO? Tell me this airline didn't just mess up that bad. Where's the full video? He lowered the phone, wide-eyed. Suddenly, fame didn't feel fun, it felt dangerous. At the front, Lena steadied herself as she pushed the service cart, her movements soft and careful. She stopped at Marcus Row. "Lunch options. Braised short rib or roasted salmon," she said gently. "Salmon," Marcus said. Her hands trembled as she plated the dish. Not from fear of him, fear of the moment. She tried to smile, but her voice quivered when she whispered, "Thank you for handling everything the way you did." Marcus gave a small nod. It matters how we respond. Behind her, Naomi stood frozen with a tray of drinks, her face blotchy, her posture defeated. She looked like someone who'd discovered her reflection for the first time and didn't like what stared back. The plane hit a small patch of turbulence. The cabin jolted, cutlery rattled. No one reacted with annoyance. They were too consumed by the human turbulence inside these walls. At the curtain, Ramirez reappeared, sweat at his temples, frustration in his tightened jaw. He approached Marcus carefully. "Mr. Ellington," he said, voice low, "we've received word from the COO. They're asking to schedule an emergency board session tonight. They're requesting begging for a statement from you before landing." Marcus took a sip of water, unbothered. "And do you think I owe them one right now?" Ramirez hesitated. "I think the company is desperate for direction." Marcus set down his glass. They didn't seek direction when this cabin failed a basic test of humanity. Ramirez looked away, ashamed. You're right. Nearby, a woman in 3A raised her hand timidly. Excuse me, sir? Her voice shook. I want to apologize too. Not because I spoke, but because I didn't. I saw what happened. I did nothing. Marcus regarded her calmly. Most people don't fail because they're cruel. They fail because they're comfortable. Her eyes watered. I won't be comfortable like that again. A quiet murmur of agreement spread through the cabin, passengers acknowledging complicity without being asked. Even those who had said nothing earlier felt the weight of presence, the invisible ledger of their silence. Whitmore's wife spoke next, her voice breaking. My husband, he wasn't raised this way. Neither was I. We just lost ourselves in the privilege of the moment. Marcus didn't look at her. He instead gazed down the aisle, at the rows of faces reflecting guilt, recognition, awakening. Moments don't change you, Marcus said softly. They reveal you. The words spread like a slow burn, lighting truth in every corner of the cabin. Then another chime, this time from the overhead PA. Ladies and gentlemen, the captain announced, his voice steadier than before, we've been informed of a corporate-wide systems delay. We ask for your patience as we coordinate with headquarters. Passengers glanced around, nervous. They knew what that meant, even if the captain didn't say it. Marcus leaned back in his seat, hands folded, eyes calm. He had already predicted the next step. The airline, scrambling. Leadership, panicking. The board, unraveling. The consequences hadn't landed yet. But they were descending, fast, and every person in first class could feel it in their bones, because Marcus wasn't done, not yet. This wasn't revenge. This was revelation, a lesson written in silence, in altitude, in the quiet power of someone who never needed to announce who he was to command the entire sky. The plane steadied. The passengers watched him with a reverence they hadn't understood hours earlier. Some storms are loud, some storms are violent, but the most devastating ones, they arrive quietly and change the landscape forever. The sun had begun its slow descent, casting a muted amber glow across the cabin as the aircraft prepared for landing. Below them, the city unfolded like a grid of cooling embers. Inside first class, however, the temperature felt different, warmer in some places, colder in others. The kind of climate shift that happens when truth finally settles where denial used to live. The captain's voice broke through the intercom. Cabin crew, prepare for arrival. The usual rustling followed seatbacks adjusting, window shades lifting, but it felt subdued, almost reverent. No one wanted to disrupt the fragile equilibrium that had formed in the last hour. The tension was no longer sharp. It had softened into awareness, reflection, and the uncomfortable clarity of hindsight. Marcus remained in his seat, hands folded loosely, gaze fixed forward. His phone rested face down on the tray table, the device still buzzing intermittently with corporate demands, panicked updates, media inquiries, and desperate pleas for guidance. He hadn't answered a single one. The truth was simple. The airline didn't need his voice yet. It needed to hear its own silence. Lena approached him for final checks. "Seatbelt, sir?" she said softly. Marcus clicked it into place. "Thank you, Lena." She glanced around the cabin at the faces, still watching Marcus like students studying the quiet professor who had reshaped their worldview. "I've worked here 7 years," she said quietly, "and I've never seen something change a room like this." "It wasn't me," Marcus replied. "It was the moment." Behind her, Naomi approached slowly, her steps hesitant, as though walking across fragile glass. She stopped at Marcus Rowe, hands clasped tightly to hide their trembling. "Mr. Ellington," her voice cracked. "I know an apology can't undo what I did, but I want to say it anyway, not because of your title or the consequences, but because I was wrong. I judged you, and that judgment hurt you, even if you didn't let it show." Marcus lifted his eyes to meet hers, not with condemnation, but with a depth that made her breath stall. "Growth starts when the apology isn't for protection," he said gently, "but for understanding." Naomi's throat tightened. She nodded, wiping a tear. "I'll remember that." As she stepped away, passengers murmured softly among themselves words like change, reflection, lesson, a far cry from the smirks and whispers that had filled the cabin at boarding. The landing gear extended, vibrating beneath the floor. A soft thud, the descent began. Whitmore leaned across the aisle. He didn't speak, just offered a solemn nod, a gesture thick with remorse, humility, and the long road he knew he needed to walk after this flight. For the first time, Marcus returned the nod. The plane touched down, wheels screeching gently against the runway, engines reversing with a controlled roar. As the aircraft began to taxi, phones across the cabin lit up with new notifications. Financial news alerts, internal leaks, rumors, speculation, breaking. Internal freeze at major airline, anonymous source. Incident on flight may be catalyst, unconfirmed reports. Link Black CEO to corporate shakeup. Passengers looked toward Marcus again, some with gratitude, others with contemplation, none with the arrogance they carried when they boarded. When the seatbelt sign turned off, Ramirez hurried toward him. "Mr. Ellington, corporate has requested a private escort for you. They've arranged—" "That won't be necessary," Marcus said, rising slowly. "But sir, they've already gotten everything they need." Ramirez stepped back, absorbing the message beneath the words. Marcus reached for his carry-on, simple, unbranded, quiet, and walked toward the exit. The aisle parted before him, not out of fear, but respect, genuine respect. The kind born from witnessing someone move through humiliation without losing an inch of dignity. As he reached the doorway, the captain emerged from the cockpit. "Sir," he said, removing his hat, "whatever happens after this, I hope the company earns back your trust." Marcus paused. "Trust isn't earned by avoiding mistakes," he said. "It's earned by correcting them." The captain lowered his head. "Understood." Marcus stepped onto the jet bridge. The cool airport air greeted him, carrying the faint scent of jet fuel and evening arrivals. His phone buzzed again, another message from Rachel. "Media waiting outside, terminal. COO asking if you'd like them escorted away." Marcus typed his first response since the freeze. "No statements yet. Not until they fix the culture that caused this. Well, talk tonight." He slipped the phone into his pocket and continued walking, calm, tall, deliberate. Behind him, inside the aircraft, passengers sat in reflective silence. Some replayed their actions. Others replayed their silence. A few wiped their eyes. Naomi sank into a jump seat, exhaling a shuddering breath. Lena placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. Whitmore stared at his hands, realizing they finally looked like his own, not the hands of a man in control, but of one being rebuilt. In the end, the lesson had spread far beyond a frozen budget. It had carved itself into the people who witnessed injustice and chose, finally, to see it. Marcus walked down the terminal, disappearing into the glow of fluorescent lights. He didn't need to raise his voice. He didn't need to announce his power. The sky had already heard him. The airline had already felt him. And everyone on that flight would remember, dignity isn't loud. But when it moves everything.